Polls confirm many Americans think that the media really are the enemy of the people. New York Times came out with a big whopper. You can see the highlight listed here, dates from October 9th to the 12th. The question about the mainstream media. If needed, the question comes, do you think that each of the following is a major threat, a minor threat, or not a threat to democracy? The question applies to the mainstream media. Response comes from America. Major threat to democracy, 59%. That's a big number. A minor threat, another 25%. So 15% say that it's not a threat to democracy, 2% undefined. What you can see here is the vast majority of the country thinks that the media is some type of threat to democracy. And a big portion of the country, the majority, thinks that they are a major threat to democracy. The media, a major threat to democracy. Let's take a look at some other aspects of this poll because it's a pretty interesting one. You can see it came over from the New York Times. Questions are, do you think the United States is on the right track or headed in the wrong direction? 62% wrong direction to 24% in the right direction. We have another question. Are you likely to vote in the upcoming election? 51% almost certain. If the election were held today, who would you vote for? Which party? 43% Republican, 42% Democrats. If you had to lean towards one party, which one would it be? 21% R's, 23% D's. And the list goes on and on. Do you approve of how Joe Biden is handling his job as president? Strongly disapprove is 42%. Strongly disapprove. Americans very unhappy about it. The big one that really stands out is the media threat. The media, of course, have been doing, in my opinion, tons of damage to the country based on their hyper partisanship. They have had TDS, derangement syndrome, for such a long time that it's hard to distinguish. Well, it's hard for them to distinguish, I think, reality from their derangement. But we have this person from MSNBC. Chris Hayes on MSNBC is saying that America, of course, is under attack. Threats to our democracy exist. And the only way that we can survive this is if our spectacular president, Joe Biden, is allowed to do whatever he wants, including releasing as much oil as possible from the strategic reserves. Anything to save America from the threats to democracy.
Oil companies, OPEC, Saudis, not exactly eager to make sure prices are low before an election where Democratic candidates are vulnerable. It's also why Saudi Arabia might want to suddenly announce a cut in oil production right before the midterms. Of course, Democrats can't just throw their hands up and say, oh, well, because the future of American democracy is in, as we report night in, night out on this program, real peril, existential peril.
Existential peril.
One of the two major parties is currently under the thrall of the guy who tried a violent coup unsuccessfully, but has...
Violent coup with no guns, except that one.
Basically announced he'd do it all over again. By one analysis, 60% of Americans will have an election denier on their ballot this November.
Wow, that's an interesting fact. Look at that. 538, 60% of Americans are going to have an election denier on the ballot. Very interesting. It almost feels like the people, might have an issue with elections, which is why they are nominating people who are election deniers, this pejorative garbage term. If you have questions about a key tool of democracy, you have a question, if you're a carpenter and you have a question about the quality of your hammer, are you an insurrectionist? You're an anti-carpenter? You're like a racist, xenophobic carpenter or something? No, you have a question about the tool. This hammer is a piece of garbage. We should probably fix it or get something better. Same thing exists in democracy. Our democracy has a tool that we use called voting, our democratic republic. And we vote in order to effectuate our policy decisions, the will of the people, so-called. And if we can't talk about the tool of the elections and whether they are predisposed towards voter enfranchisement or voter integrity or a nice balance between the two, well, then we are actually undermining democracy by not making sure that we have the right tools that are nice and sharp and chiseled so that we can use them effectively. But they would rather you just say, everything's fine. Don't have any questions about anything. Thank you for doing everything so appropriately. Loved the last election. I loved how long it took. Couple weeks is perfect. And yes, put boards up on the street. Do whatever you need to do. It's all great. We're just going to sit here and shut up about it, which apparently is the new default. But that's not what's actually happening. They're telling us that's what we have to do, but Americans are rising up all over the place. 60% of Americans are going to have an election denier, somebody who has a question about how one of democracy's most important tools is used. They're going to be on the ballot. Chris Hayes says, we're all going to die as a result of this.
The stakes in the upcoming elections are the highest they've been in a very long time. This is the first post-coup election in America. We cannot expect threats to democracy to be the only salient issue for voters, even if it is salient for a lot. I mean, there's millions of voters and people have complicated and busy lives and they've got things they're thinking about when they go to the polls, like the cost of living, inflation, and yes, gas prices, the one price in America that is posted on every street corner, those digits, they are going to be front of mind for voters. And so we find ourselves in a situation where keeping gas prices low is key to preserving and strengthening the future of our democracy. And so here we are. Hence Biden releasing oil from the reserves today.
Got to release oil to protect American democracy. Do you see how this is going now?
And all this speaks to what the future of our elections will look like, because you can't just count on one thing to preserve American democracy. You can't just count on the voters to vote for it, and you can't just count on the courts, and you can't just count on civil society. It's going to require a broad coalition of factors, people being smart,
like the media,
and tactically astute, all working together across the spectrum of civil society to preserve the American experiment.
Yeah, and Mark Elias and Michael Sussman and Hillary Clinton and all of the DNC who constantly collude with the FBI to get their way, to prosecute their political enemies. All has to be done in the sake of saving America, from Chris Hayes. So you can see clearly why these people are disdained by the American people. People considering them to be a threat because of exactly what he says. Everything we have to do now is existential or else. That includes simple resource management, like managing oil. It's an existential threat to democracy. Do you realize how far and incompetent these people have gone? What a joke. There's oil all over the place, all over the country. And he's going to tell us it's an existential threat. That's why Joe Biden has to release oil. Just go drill. Why did he cancel the Keystone Pipeline in the first place? It's his self-inflicted existential crisis. Enemy of the people, of course, is the correct phrase. Now we have another clip from this woman. I never remember her name. As I always say, it's not important. She's on MSNBC as well. MSNBC news anchor learned a new word called autocracy. And I don't know where this came from. Maybe the Jon Stewart show, or she got a newsletter inbox, something somewhere. Maybe she read a new Bob Woodward book. Don't know. But she uses it, and she uses it with some authority. She says, never in the history of our world have we seen an autocracy, an autocratic nation have a strong economy. And I'm not real sure what the hell she's talking about, but maybe you do.
Matt Dowd, I've asked this question every day this week. Name an autocracy in which the economy is flourishing. There isn't one, because they do not coexist. How do you help them?
Do we have a bunch of autocracies in the world right now? I didn't quite think so.
Democrats sync up what is really flagrant now and brazen anti-democratic policies and moves from the Republicans with their fear-mongering about the economy. A thriving economy cannot exist in an autocratic country.
There it is again.
Well, I'll remind people, too, of a history lesson that there in the 1930s Germany, there was a candidate and there was a party that said they were going to do something about inflation. And they did do something about inflation. Inflation went away, but so did the democracy in Germany. In the 1930s up until 1945.
You guys are
I think the problem is twofold. To me, it's really twofold. One, I think the media, has a responsibility in this. And I think you obviously are doing this with a headline show on Deadline Democracy, and you do it every day. But there's too much reporting on.
This guy, I guess, is praising the media. I would consider the media to be a part of the problem. He says they're a part of the solution. You're doing a great job calling out democracy. Otherwise, we don't want to turn into Nazi Germany, which is where we might go because of inflation. bizarre people. But that, my friends, is the update. The media is now completely disdained by the American people. Over 50% saying they are a direct major threat to democracy. Of course, that is true. We will continue to lampoon them as they lampoon themselves on a regular basis. And I hope you join us on that journey right here, wherever it is you're watching this video. Thank you for liking it before you move on. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one.